I am so excited to have back on the podcast today Dawn and Ashley Soifer, co-founders of the National Microschooling Center, a national nonprofit that works to support microschool founders across the U.S. Dawn and Ashley, welcome back to the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you. We're
Thanks for
excited
having
to
us.
be here.
It's so great to have you here. I'm excited to talk about predictions and trends related to microschooling in 2025. But before we get to that, Ashley, tell us a little bit about the origin story of the National Microschooling Center. What prompted you and Dawn to create this fantastic organization?
Thanks. It's always a fun story to share. So, several years ago, back in pandemic times, we were in talking to the city leadership for the city of North Las Vegas, which is the poorest, fastest growing, hardest working city in Nevada. The schools were shut down. The school district was just not there for the residents of the city of North Las Vegas, and city leadership knew that they needed to do something for their families. They were hearing from families, hey, we're essential workers, we're going to work. We need somewhere for our kids to go that's safe, and education would be great, right? Like that's something that just their needs weren't being met. So Dawn had been publishing papers on microschooling, doing microschooling research for years, knew immediately that microschools would be the solution, right? We're able to build a microschool quickly, it's flexible, it's adaptive, you customize it to the needs of the families. So we worked through the night, went back the next morning, dropped off two briefing books on the city manager's desk, and partnered with the city of North Las Vegas to create the first ever public-private partnership microschool. We ran the Southern Nevada Urban Micro Academy in partnership with the city of North Las Vegas. During the pandemic school year, we served a little over 100 kids. And just had a blast doing it. These were some of the coolest families. We got to work with a really great team. We assembled a team. Some were veteran educators, some were completely new to education, and it created a unique, really just rich experience for the kids to learn from a variety of different adults. We had promised the city that we would design and operate this in year one, and then we had to get back to the work that we needed to do. But in the middle of all of this, we started to receive some pretty good publicity for the work that we were doing and started getting more phone calls from folks, first in Nevada saying, hey, I see what you're doing with the city of North Las Vegas, and I want to start a micro school. Can you help me? And others saying, hey, I'm doing this thing that I think might be a micro school, and I don't want to do it on my own anymore. Can you help me? So that was really exciting. And we were meeting with a good group of Nevada microschool founders, doing trainings, connecting folks. And then we started getting calls from other states, and the works just started growing. And we found ourselves traveling around and helping people launch microschools. So in August of 2022, the National Microschooling Center was officially launched, and we haven't looked back since. It's been a fun, busy, exciting journey.
Oh, I love that. Well, congratulations to you both. I'll turn it over to you in just a minute, Dawn, but follow-up question for you, Ashley. So since August of 2022, what has been the impact of the National Microschooling Center?
Yeah, so we have worked with over 1,300 micro schools nationwide, which is
Wow.
really exciting. Helped launch hundreds of those micro schools. It's been really, really neat to see the combination of different people coming to this movement, right? So we've got some folks that reach out and say, hey, I just heard about this thing called microschooling. I want to know more. And it's exciting to be on that journey with them of like, yeah, absolutely. Here's some resources. Let's talk, getting them in some of our trainings and seeing that I have this little idea grow into my doors are open and I'm serving children. And then also hearing from people that have been doing this for over a decade and are so excited to be part of a national movement and share their voice and their experience and be connected to the community.
Ah, so great. And Dawn, I know you're, well, both of you, but I'll turn over to Dawn now, are the sort of the go-to experts whenever journalists and media outlets writing a story or creating a narrative around microschooling. You're also publishing research frequently about what microschools look like and who's creating them and why, which is captured in your annual sector analysis reports that come out in the spring of each year. So great work there. But Dawn, I want to ask you, I think journalists probably ask you this all the time. How do you define a microschool? Ashley mentioned the city of North Las Vegas, the first microschool that you helped to create, that public-private partnership there, serving 100 kids. Some people think of microschools, they think 100 kids, that's not a microschool. And we've talked before about that the one of the benefits of the sort of current definition or lack thereof of microschooling is that it enables individual founders and families to sort of self-identify and kind of craft their own identity, their own definition of what it is they're doing and why. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about your response when people ask you about definitions of microschooling.
Sure. Thanks, Kerry. And sure enough, I mean, when we hear from people all the time, they start with, I heard about microschooling from Kerry McDonald, and I'd like to, I found you online. So you're getting the word out is so crucial to, I mean, we get that back every single day. So thank you for being the messenger, the communicator that you are for the most exciting movement in education in a generation. And to
Well,
come
yeah, thanks. It's a two-way street because I'm always sending folks your way too. So we're in this together for sure.
Well, love it, love it, and just that dynamic, right? Like, who are we hearing from, and who are we sending, and why is this movement so exciting? And the just beautiful diversification and pluralism that we're seeing every single day, and this thing is absolutely continuing to grow, and in all of these incredibly diversified ways. So why would we want to constrain it by having elected lawmakers who care most about raising money for reelection try to pass a definition in statute? And then when that happens, and we've all been involved in different parts of the sausage making of the lawmaking process. I can remember when Michael Horn and I were working together on a federal definition of blended learning and personalized learning. And once you can get a consensus around, of all of these elected officials on what to vote for a definition, at that point, it's probably taken so long that the whole fast moving, fast innovating landscape has already changed and evolved. And then you have to go back and change that definition again. And why are they looking for the definitions in the first place? Two reasons. One is for allowable uses of funding. And we have micro schools in states where they have an opportunity to take advantage of school choice funds and thrive. In those same states, we have micro schools that choose to not because they love what they're doing, and the conformity that would be required to comply with the definitions and the requirements in their program are not the reasons their parents chose them. And then last, the reason that, once something is a definition and it's in statute, regulators gonna regulate. That's just what they do. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. As this movement is continuing to just by leaps and bounds redefine itself every time you look, I don't know what benefit would be gained. And sure enough, we hear from a lot of researchers who want to study the thing, and researchers want to have specific definitions that they can use to compare. And as microschool families ourselves, we don't necessarily love the idea of comparing ourselves to norm kids in other places. So I see the incentives, and in some states there are particular advantages that microschools can gain from having an entity defined in law. But I really love your question, and let's be thoughtful about what we need to think through before we get locked into legal definitions for something that's continuing to innovate.
Yeah, continuing to innovate and evolve. And Ashley, I'll kind of throw it back to you. I talk to founders, as I'm sure you do too, who decide to start small, like many private schools or other educational entities. They may start from their living room with a handful of kids, including their own, and then before they know it, they have so much demand. They're rapidly expanding, but often they want to keep that sort of climate culture of microschooling. I wonder if you could talk a little bit, Ashley, about what are some of the commonalities that microschool founders and microschool spaces share, even if their size may differ from, again, a handful of kids to, in some cases, more than 100.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite things about microschooling, and I have to admit, I say this all the time. One of my favorite things, and
Hmm.
it's always a new favorite, right? But one thing that I really do love, and I'm sure, Carrie, as you visited micro schools around the country, you've seen the same thing. Every micro school that you walk into just seems so different from the last one that you visited, right? And it's truly creating an opportunity where all children can find a place to thrive because there are so many different options available. But there are some commonalities. There are some things that we see that are similar. We love taking folks out to see a micro school for the very first time. And every time we do a micro school tour, one of the main comments that we get at the end is, wow, in every micro school that we visited, every child was engaged. that's something that we see, right? It doesn't matter if it is in somebody's living room with maybe 5 kids or in a storefront with 25 kids. Kids are happy, they're thriving, they're engaged in their learning, they're taking control of their education. It's really exciting to see. I think something else too, as you mentioned, sometimes it starts really small and that demand grows and grows and grows. We work with a lot of microschool founders who the word scale just means something different, right? Everybody is always talking about how do you scale? How do you scale? So many micro school founders see the answer to that not as I'm going to grow from this small micro school to something larger, or I'm going to open a second campus, although some do, and that's great. But a lot of micro school founders say, hey, I want to keep this small. I want to keep this culture. I want to keep this like this. But my neighbor, a couple blocks down the road, is really interested in opening a micro school. So how can I help them? And I really think that that's something that's incredibly exciting about this is that micro school founders are anxious to share their knowledge with others. They're anxious to help others in this journey. They're looking forward to having a ecosystem around them as ecosystem building has really become so important. They're looking forward to how do we work together as micro school founders to share resources and to continue to create environments. So if I do have a waiting list, I can tell these families, hey, guess what? This really great option opened up 3 miles down the road. Let's go check it out together.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, each microschool is so different, as you said, Ashley, and yet there's so much that is the same. You talked about engaged children. I find that just sort of the joyful learning environment is consistent regardless of which microschool I'm visiting. The kids are happy to be there. They want to go to school. They sort of don't look forward to school vacations or long weekends the way certainly I did as a kid. And I would have said I liked school, but I certainly was excited when our winter vacation came. And that's just not the experience that we see in microschools today. The kids are just so happy. And then with that happiness, of course, comes deep and enduring learning. And it's just wonderful to see the growth of these environments in large part thanks to your support of founders across the country. And Dawn, you don't see this slowing down. You published an article at the National Microschooling Center's website, microschoolingcenter.org, recently with your 5 predictions for 2025 and what microschooling would look like. And the first one is that this is going to keep growing, that there continues to be momentum in the microschooling space. I wonder if you could talk about what you see happening in terms of the growth of microschooling this year.
Sure, thanks. So a bunch of years into tracking this thing, we all know something that's really fundamentally not new at all, right? Microschooling, multi-age classroom models are something that have really been around for a long time, but really took off in prevalence in American education during the pandemic for one set of reasons. Since that set of reasons, it's not about that at all. This is about families recognizing that the choices that they're in now are just not probably for them what's best to prepare their kid for the future that their kid is going to have and not the future that we had when we were that kid's age sitting in those same seats. And the beautiful thing, as we hear from people launching microschools or people that have been doing this for a long time and are either new to us or new to calling it a movement, but really it's growth. It's people launching microschools. The diversification of it, the fact that it's happening in states all over the country in different settings for different reasons by people who are really entrenched, really part of the community that they're serving and really understand the needs, the evolving needs of the kids that they're looking to serve. So nothing meaningful in education happens in a vacuum, right? So microschools are popping up in response to lots of things, in response to the needs of their communities and families, in response in some cases to the framework in their state and to other things as well. Those circumstances are going to change. That's just how it's going to be. And we're seeing some characteristics of it, like microschooling fundamentally, right, is about moving schooling, the business of schooling, out of buildings that are 50 years old on average that cost 50 to $100 million. And as that happens, microschools don't need to last forever. Like some phenomenal microschools will last for 5 years to 10 years, whatever it might be, and then go on to a different phase of life, which might very well mean moving to a different state and starting a different microschool for different ages as their own kids get older. So these are factors that we're seeing sort of be characteristics of a growing movement. Is the movement continuing to grow? Absolutely. And it's the independent, diversified, distributed microschools that while there are bigger entities that are getting involved in this space now, in terms of numbers, what we really see is those independents really driving the lifeblood of this thing, joined by some others who are fascinating as well.
Don, you talk in the piece about the growth of homeschooling being amplified or accelerated by school choice policies in many states, including some states that have expanded their school choice programs to be universal, applying to all K-12 students. And in some of these states, microschooling and similar innovative educational environments are included in these school choice programs that enable education funding to follow students to their preferred learning environment. What is your sense around the sort of interplay between microschooling and school choice? Because certainly we know that microschools are everywhere in every state, even if there are no private school choice programs. But they do seem to be accelerating in states with school choice programs. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that relationship.
It is really interesting. We published a paper in September sort of analyzing microschools in the school choice with active school choice programs that microschools are welcomed to participate in because microschools don't have the opportunity, or families don't have the opportunity to choose microschools in every state, even if it has a school choice program for regular, for reasons just because these programs were designed for traditional larger schools that don't always think about the needs of microschools. That said, there are distinct characteristic differences between microschools in the states that are responding to specific school choice programs, but the requirements of those programs, one of which is that we found that microschools in those states are more likely to demonstrate their impact using norm referenced assessments, and a relatively little number of those, where microschools that don't have the requirements of their state's ESA program in mind are going, microschools, as you know, Kerry, you talk about it every week, are ingenious at the really inspired ways that they choose to measure and then communicate the impact that their families know that they're having in ways that aren't locked into the same ways that big education has sold the American public, that the standardized testing regimes are the ways that we need to measure kids, which microschool families don't get fooled by that.
Yeah, and I was just in Florida recently for the International School Choice and Reform Conference. I know a conference that you're frequently involved with as well, and of course, so many of the microschool founders in Florida and South Florida in particular. And we're seeing so much growth in Florida and other states like Arizona with these creative learning environments because of school choice programs that make these programs more accessible to more families. And in many cases, there aren't sort of these traditional accountability metrics like standardized testing that we're sort of measuring outcomes and measuring success of these programs in different ways, primarily parent interest, parent demand. Are parents sending their kids to these programs? Are they keeping their kids in these programs? Are they telling their friends, right? Ashley, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of these outcomes and success measures of microschooling environments.
Absolutely, I would love to. It's so exciting how micro schools have the flexibility in, like Don was mentioning, some of the ESA requirements do come with standardized testing, things like that. But in truly flexible environments, the ways that micro schools can show their impact. We launched a measuring impact cohort with a great group, a little over 20 different micro schools from around the country joining together to talk about the ways that they measure impact, what's important to them, what's important to their families. Some are taking what seem like, tools that we're all familiar with and using them in really innovative ways, right? So doing some initial academic assessments to help plan out their budget for the year, right? Do I need to bring in a literacy specialist? And then there are others who are saying, we know that academic growth is happening. We're more concerned with, is this child gaining confidence? Is this child able to advocate for themselves? And listening to how they determine how to measure that impact has been so exciting and so neat to learn from. I mean, as a parent of microschooling children, I see the growth in my child, right? You can talk to any parent and they will tell you that same thing. I see the difference in my kid. My child loves to go to school, just like you were saying earlier, right? They don't want school vacation. I was talking to a microschool founder just yesterday who put it out to their kids. Hey, we're thinking about maybe switching to a 4-day school week next week. Right now, they're full-time 5 days. Let's do a vote. no, kids were like, no, we want to be here every day. Please don't make us come only 4 days a week. So it's things like that, right? How do you take these different ways that you're seeing such a positive change in these kids' life, and how do you measure that and put it out in ways that key stakeholders can understand? How do you help families share those stories? So it's just been really exciting to learn with these, like I said, a little over 20 different micro schools about what's important to them, what's important to their families. And again, as a microschooling parent, I I'm not concerned about standardized testing. Like Don was saying, right? We're looking at preparing children for a future that's in front of them, not preparing children for the future that was in front of us when we were their age. I'm concerned about the changes that I'm seeing in my child and they're happening and they're positive, right? I'm excited that my oldest can stand up and say, actually, I disagree. When before it was very difficult for her to create an argument that she felt she could strongly support. So just a variety of different ways that kids are growing, kids are thriving, and ways to share that out.
Great. Ashley, we know that many microschool founders decide to open their programs as homeschool centers or tutoring centers. Some open as state-recognized private schools. What are you finding are some of the reasons for that? And I would imagine that varies by location, by state, regarding regulations and so forth. But what are sort of the general reasons that you're hearing why a founder might choose one structure over another?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on, Kerry. It's really about the frameworks in that state, right? And it's oftentimes geared towards what's going to give that microschool founder the most flexibility, what's going to allow them to really teach these kids in the way that they know is best for the children that they're serving. So oftentimes that does look like opening as a learning center for homeschooling children and being able to fall under those homeschooling laws and that flexibility that's provided for a microschool founder. And then in other states where it's not as difficult to open as a licensed private school, sometimes that allows a little more flexibilities in those states. So it's really about analyzing the frameworks of the state that you're in, determining what style of teaching and learning you want to do, the flexibilities that you need, and finding the best path forward for you and your families.
Great. Don, I'll go back to you now and back to this great article on 2025 predictions for microschools. And one of the things you bring up is look for accreditation, sort of flexible and creative accreditation options for microschools. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about this. First, what accreditation is and isn't, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means. And second, where are we in terms of accreditation with microschooling, and why could it be something we should look into a little bit more?
Great. So, better than anybody, microschooling families want to do the right thing for their kid, for sure. And a lot of them are new to the microschooling movement. So they want to ask the right questions. They want to do the right things. Microschool founders who are totally in touch with them want to help their families. So the reasons that microschool founders will look to accreditation are several. Sometimes they just want to be able to show their family a good housekeeping seal of approval that shows that some third-party external expert approves of the process that's going on. That said, the accreditation process, and many of us that have been involved in it in different, more traditional schooling settings, is a gatekeeper function run by established interests, private companies, who have been granted by state governments the authority to decide what's good and what's not good for a model. And they're created. The accreditation models that we see can take weeks and can be expensive, and they're created for large traditional, not only private schools but public charter and public schools as well. So they're created with these in mind. And as we spent a good bit of time talking to all of the accreditation bodies have to be approved in each state, validity in those states. And they're interested in the microschooling space for sure because of all the good press that microschools are getting. But their base is people that have been running established traditional settings who microschools are competing with for the same kids for sure. So it's a slow process. Some of them really do want to get it. And for participation in some school choice programs, accreditation by lawmakers who are trying to do the right thing and passing it just naturally default and say, but an entity has to be accredited to be a participant in the program, but don't then go and look at the fact that in their state, the only approved accreditors are these establishment gatekeepers that don't really understand microschooling and don't necessarily want to, cannibalize their business model by helping small startup microschools take kids away from big established institutions that are 50 years old. So it's an important question, but I put in my predictions that it's moving in the right direction, and it's going to be because it is sort of a free market. I mean, it's a controlled market for sure. But as people, and we've been spending a fair bit of time on developing models and helping accreditors understand the many ways, direct and indirect ways that accreditation for microschools needs to be different to get this right. And it's feeling like it's starting to take traction. And I really do think that in the course of the 2025 year that we're going to see good, significant movement by some accreditation entities to move in the right direction. And because there are so many micro schools, we're going to see the market is going to move as a result of those best
Mm,
examples.
yeah. And Ashley, the National Microschooling Center works primarily with founders, supporting entrepreneurial parents and teachers who are creating these new innovative learning environments. But you also get a lot of calls from parents and interact with parents who are looking for a microschool for their kid or wondering about what else is available for them. And in some cases, if they can't find it, they build it themselves and become a founder. And you recently shared on X a results of a recent survey by the National School Choice Awareness Foundation showing skyrocketing rates of interest in microschooling and hybrid learning environments, a tripling in 2025 compared to the average of between 2022 and 2024 of parents considering a microschool or a hybrid option for their kids. This is at the same time that parents considering traditional neighborhood public schools is declining. And homeschooling rates also were up, another line item there, up 39% in terms of parents considering homeschooling this year. What do you think is driving that interest in homeschooling? I'm sorry, in homeschooling and microschooling and other innovative learning environments?
That was such an exciting result to see. I was thrilled when the National School Choice Awareness Foundation put that out. Yeah, so I think parents are talking, right? I mean, when I first started microschooling my kids, I had some friends say like, "Oh, you're so brave to do that thing with your child," right? It was just so new. And then a few months later, they're like, "Hey, wait, hang on. Like, let's actually talk about this now. What's that microschooling thing that you're doing? Because I see a difference in your kids." I think that word is getting out. It's continuing to get out, and families are so happy. And people are seeing a change in other people's children and want to know, what are you doing? What's going on? Um, I didn't realize the amount of stress that was put on the whole family when you have a child that's in a schooling setting that they're unhappy with, right? I knew that my child didn't want to go. I knew that they were unhappy. I felt bad about it. I didn't realize the change it would make for our whole family when my kid came home from school excited to go back the next day. When all of a sudden our dinner conversations were like, "Hey, this happened today and this happened," and it wasn't trying to like pull teeth, getting words out of them, right? People are seeing that. They're seeing kids that are really enjoying what they're doing. They're seeing kids having the time and flexibility to explore their interest and develop. And it's just been so exciting. And families want that. They see this and they say, "Hey, help me find an option because I want this for my kid."
Oh, it's so great. Yeah, more and more parents saying, I want one of these amazing learning environments for my children, and sort of those network effects, not only in terms of founders and prospective founders finding each other and feeling the confidence to build a new microschool or learning environment, but also parents feeling supported in demanding one of these new learning environments for their kids. And then, of course, that's spawning even more entrepreneurship in terms of microschool founders. So, Don, how are public schools, public charter schools, maybe more established traditional schools responding to the microschooling surge? This was another prediction that you had around sort of the public sector response to microschooling.
We're hearing a lot from public school folks, and each one is a different conversation, right? Because they're responding to specific things around them. But whether it's superintendents who are losing their families and their teachers to microschooling situations that don't want to lose their best ones anymore, And maybe they have extra classrooms or extra space. We see public charter schools, which the growth of the public charter school movement, particularly in outside the box original ways, is it's well documented the struggles that the sector is having trying to be outside the box. And in some states, the charter sector isn't growing at all. The same energy that the charter sector had especially in the early days, these really innovative, life-changing educators that really want to do something great, meeting together in church basements to concoct something that's new and different. I haven't seen that energy in that sector in years. We got it. And look at the microschool leaders everywhere. So whether it's using the laboratory of the incredible work that you see every week in microschools and wanting to capture some of that energy into their own school districts in a good, thoughtful way, like many of the superintendents around the country in New York and Utah that we're hearing from school choice states and not school choice states. And maybe it's just, we have the conversations where what is the true autonomy that you can give this school within a school setting to be able to do this? Or maybe a charter school authorizer is in a position to help them do something really interesting, like the incredible, thoughtful leaders like the Purdue Polytechnic High School, which is a world-class charter school that's opening microschools as a better way to serve the needs of particular kids and families that they know well. So these conversations are happening, and that energy is continuing to grow. And how well they do it remains to be seen, and how much autonomy they can really give the microschools that they set up to have, choice, to let them use the curricular approaches or the models that really benefit those kids. Whether they're ever going to be able to really get what microschools are, we'll see. But in the meantime, the energy is there and it's growing.
I love that. Well, as they say, imitation is the best form of flattery. So it's great to see these public schools and public charter schools looking at the tremendous results in microschooling and wanting to bring that into their own learning communities. So exciting to see where that goes this year and beyond. So, Ashley, as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. What is the best way for prospective microschool founders to connect with you? What sort of services or support will they receive from the National Microschooling Center on their startup journey? How can they best utilize your resources?
Thanks. So always reach out. We're happy to hear from microschool founders anytime. Our website, microschoolingcenter.org, is a great place to start. You can email any of our team. It's always just our first name at microschoolingcenter.org. We have a training coming up that we're super excited about. It's our microschool starter training. We have over 200 folks registered to attend that. So we are really looking forward to that one. And then we also do monthly meetings for people that are just new to the center, wanting to learn more, whether it's about wanting to learn more about microschooling or they've been doing this for a while and want to learn more about how to connect with the center. Jill Haskins on our team runs that every month. Our calendar is full all the time. So if you're looking for a way to connect and learn more, definitely check out our calendar and register for some of the events. They're always a fun time.
Yeah, and important to note that you're servicing prospective microschool founders and have resources for that, but also current microschool founders, really providing that community and that support and all kinds of resources for existing microschool founders as well. So, just a wealth of resources. And you also have a weekly newsletter that goes out to microschooling founders, prospective founders, and others interested in this space. So, again, the website is microschoolingcenter.org. And Don and Ashley Soifer, thank you so much for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Always great, Kerry. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.